Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Burns. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I started off at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts. Before that, as a high school student, I was sort of dabbling around, but I became a documentary filmmaker when I was in college. And by the end, my senior project was a history film about Old Sturbridge Village, which is the colonial Williamsburg of New England and a wonderful place. And most of it was just live cinematography of people interpreting the work that they did in costume there at the period that they cover, 1790 to 1840, the 50 years after the beginning of the United States. And the last shot is a pan across a painting, going from an agricultural scene to a kind of industrial plant that was just starting as the Industrial Revolution was getting started, a mill. And I did not know at the time that this would be setting my career for years as I did that. And so I wish, knowing now about National History Day and particularly the extraordinary role the Better Angels have played in the Next Generation Angel Awards, I wish I had had the kind of opportunities to participate as these young people have at two levels, junior and senior high school, in history films, which they will tell you are incredibly hard to make. They're limited to 10 minutes. And the six films that we have represented here by these six extraordinary filmmakers are really, really fantastic. And I just can't say enough about what you've accomplished, to congratulate you all for your winning, and to I'd now just like to go through and just ask you a little bit to introduce yourself and the subject of your film. And I'm just going to go as I see in my field and ask David Gilbert to go first and tell us, about your film and topic and why they chose it, the medium to tell the story, and is this your first film?
So I did the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. This was not my first year. I did it last year. I did a project on the race for the North Pole. But last year I chose documentary and I'm never going back. It's incredibly fun. Uh, the whole process, I really enjoyed myself, and I'm probably going to do it in high school. I just find it a lot of fun making documentaries.
That's great. Well, congratulations. You made a wonderful one. David, Miranda?
All right, so yeah, my name is David Miranda. I did my documentary on Miranda v. Arizona and the Miranda rights. This was my second film. I did a documentary last year, for NHD, and yeah, definitely like I'm not gonna change it again. The learning curve is a lot, and it's also one of the funnest categories for me. So
You're in it to stay.
yeah, probably yeah.
Yeah. Maeve.
I'm Maeve, and I did my documentary on Sesame Street and how that was a turning point in educational television. I did do a documentary last year on the Radium Girls, but I really like finding a bunch of images to like tell the story and the history of your topic. And I think if I do History Day again, I definitely will do a documentary again, because it's such a fun way to like present your information.
That's great. Jack, tell us about yourself and
Hi, I'm Jack. My project this year was on Claude Shannon and his 1948 mathematical theory of communication. The original inspiration was AI and the fast-paced world we live in. How can we communicate with each other so fast? Um, I have done it in the past. I did one last year on Lillian Gilbreth and ergonomics. This the field, the documentary subject, the documentary medium is just a great way to showcase all your information. You can get pictures and sound, and it's all in one inclusive category. I don't plan on doing a different category if I do NHD again.
that's great. Elena?
Yeah, sorry. Hey y'all, my name's Elena, and I did my topic on the Congo crisis. And I also did a documentary last year about a journalist named Elsie Robinson. And I really just fell in love with documentaries because I get to be super creative when I'm like writing, and then I get to like mess around with like voice recording, and then I get to put visuals on top of it. So it's just sort of like everything that I love doing. Um, So yeah.
Thank you. Harmony, last but not least.
Hello, my name is Harmony. This is my third year doing a documentary for NHD. This year, my topic was about woman FDA worker Frances Oldham Kelsey and her role in preventing the entry of the drug thalidomide into the United States. It's really cool to be here because the first documentary I did was on Muhammad Ali, and it was the exact same year that Mr. Burns did it. And then my documentary last year was about the first McDonald's in the Soviet Union.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Well, let's go into this next round of conversation and we'll start with Harmony and talk a little bit about your project. I was so impressed with it. It's such a tough topic, and I'd love you to talk about how you made the decision to get involved in it and what were the difficult aspects of trying to tell this story. Say, compared with, Muhammad Ali, who leaps off any screen and sort of does half the work for you, as I know firsthand.
So my topic is related to pharmacology, and I initially knew that I really wanted to do something related to chemistry because I had a really amazing chemistry teacher at the time, and I just really loved the subject. Um, and then what was difficult about this topic was that Frances Kelsey is sort of an unknown hero. The reason we don't know her is exactly because we don't know the tragedy that she, like, especially saved Americans from. And what was really difficult about this was that I couldn't find that many comprehensive sources that really could give me an accurate outline. And I also, one of the things that was really difficult was getting an actual figure on how many people she saved by blocking this drug from entering the US. And so then when I reached out to the leading thalidomide expert, Dr. Trent Stevens, he gave me a number on that, and he said she prevented about 1 million cases of deformed children in the US. And I think it was really hard to look at all those pictures because it was such a tragedy and it was all caused by like a lot of greed, but a human greed to make money.
I
But
found your film so moving and so emotional that it would take, this is basically one of her first, if not her first cases that she's acting on, and she's really the difference between thalidomide, you know, affecting 1 million people in the United States and not, and us leading the way in the prevention of the use of a drug and the lack of an approval of a drug for this sort of thing. And as we know, it's ravaging a lot of other Western countries. I just found how, and I guess I'm asking a question about how difficult it was to balance the sort of emotional and the research, which is extensive, as you're describing, not completely easy to obtain.
yeah, I think I just was really it's sometimes I wanted to quit. I was like, why did I pick something so sad? But I was just really touched by the experiences of kindness that I had in doing this project because I got to interview some people who were actually affected by thalidomide in the UK, and they were so kind. Like one of them, Mandy Delamere, she is blind and she has no arms, but she got on Zoom all by herself to just talk to like a random kid who emailed. Um, so I think that was really touching and really encouraging to finish this project.
Yeah, it's really moving and really complicated. I just salute you for the effort that you made. It's complicated, and yet somehow there was that the biographical dimension of her story, of Frances's story, sort of helped you carry the entire complexity of the story. And it was just uplifting and heroic in the midst of being a pretty tragic thing. And I think you are to be congratulated. It's a wonderful film. Elena, can you talk a little bit about what drew you to this incredibly difficult subject of the Congo? It's filled with incredibly complex ideas, ideas that a lot of people don't want us to talk about when we're in school anymore, and sort of colonial periods and post-colonial periods and exploitation of the continents and peoples, particularly in Africa. What drew you to it, and how did you center and ultimately choose the Congo as your subject matter?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. I was originally going to do a topic on like the jungle and food safety laws and like that sort of like muckraking journalism. And it was probably like late September, early October when we were in English class and we were reading the Poisonwood Bible, which is set in like 1960s Congo. And I like knew it was like based on historical fact. Um, but I didn't know how much of it was fact. So I did some just like quick Google searches and I went up to my teacher and I was like, hey, this seems like a much more interesting topic. Um, like, can I switch? And there were like a few times where I was like, "Ooh, this I might have made the wrong decision," but I don't think I did because it was just like a really interesting and really complex topic that I was able to like take and like just run with it. Uh, yeah.
It's incredibly political and critical, and I'm wondering if in the process you ran into any flack or that you had to overcome it, or how were you able to sort of, as we like to say, call balls and strikes? This is exactly what happened, but you're able to bring in philosophical ideas about, as I was saying, colonialism, and in this case, the oppression of the resources and the people of the third world by first world powers like Belgian Congo and I mean like Belgium and the United States. Can you talk about how difficult it was to sort of balance the story? Because what we are always achieving in NHD and certainly with the work that I do is to ask tough questions, to tell tough stories, complicated stories, but at the same time also not put your thumb on the scale and reveal political intentions.
Yeah, I definitely did have some trouble like balancing like the political like aspect of it and also just like the historical thing because I think because it was a political topic, they were pretty intertwined. So I definitely had to consider like, okay, who's going to be hearing this? Who's going to be affected by this? And like how far am I willing to go of like the boldness of my argument almost? Like I don't know if I'm saying that right.
No, yeah, I get it. I get it. It's to me, I find in my own work, there's sort of constant calibration. Suddenly you look, and today it's seemed to be leaning this way, and another day that way, and you sort of try to figure out both visually and orally how you're going to make a presentation.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely had to like as I was writing my script, I had to like sit down with my parents and like as we were just like working through some things, I had to be like, okay, this is the stance I'm going to take. This is how I'm going to make it like not too like bold almost, and this is how I'm going to stand my ground and defend it. Um, yeah.
And did you have to defend it? I mean, did you get feedback? Did you get flack? Did you have people who were concerned about aspects of it once the film was done? Or has it been just, I hope, universally appreciated?
I think it's been mostly like appreciative. Like I don't remember anything. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, it's such a complex story, and I've come across it several times in my own investigations and own work, and it's been at the margins of various films, including Muhammad Ali, and it's something I was aware of it growing up, and my father was talking to me about it, and I thought that you handled it just extremely beautifully and with a great deal of poise, and I was so impressed, Elena, with the work. I really thought it was a first-rate
Thank
film.
you.
Yeah, so Jack, wow, and what did you say the previous topic was that you had taken on?
The previous topic was Lillian Gilbreth and ergonomics, like
Er-
human
ergon-
working
yeah,
conditions.
ergonomics. I mean, that's amazing. But now you've taken on an incredibly complex intellectual idea. And in the limited amount of time you're given, and the limited amount of words that you can cram into that, it seems to me, and you are correctly lauded for this film, that you are there's a bravery in this, the ability to take a complex subject and try to, in a short period of time, turn it into something that we can all understand, and in a way that you go, wow, I had no ideas. This is the beginning of ones and zeros. This is a theoretical approach, and giving us the interior of the Bell Labs, and you begin to realize what's going on there, and it's identified with a particular person, so it has that biographical hook that allows you to do it. And yet, at the heart of it was this incredibly complex idea. And first of all, congratulations on the bravery to do it, but did you ever at some point go, wow, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to take in this short period of time and explain this complex theory and what it means, the arc of its influence across the last several decades since the paper was published in the 1940s? Can you talk about the kind of struggles that you had?
Yeah, so I've definitely the main struggle is trying to take those scientific ideas and break them down into terms that everybody can understand. I mean, everybody knows what AI is at this point. Everybody knows what all the technology is, and but nobody really knows how we got to this point. We know, oh, in the 1800s we didn't have this. In the 1900s we developed it. In the 2000s now we have it. But you don't bridge that gap very well in people's minds. So breaking that down for people to understand, I thought was very difficult. Um, it also took it took a while to like fine tune what I was looking at because I originally looked at AI and went back like the Watson bot for Jeopardy, Deep Blue for chess. And that's how I found Claude Shannon in the first place because he had worked on some chess codes in the 1950s. Um, And so I found that, and the article had said that the more important thing that he did was information theory. I was like, oh, what's that? Then I researched it, found it, and was like, wow, that's incredible. That's amazing how we found this diverse web, this internet, this interconnectedness, all from this one paper that he wrote in 1948, which is way before you think all the internet came around, before
Right.
Vince Fish created the internet, and before Steve Jobs created Apple, and
Uh,
before all that.
So tell me what your strategies were for not just the presentation of the material, but the balance of the material, given the complexity of the subject matter, and yet you do have biographical stuff, you do have archive, you've got a long arc of a history, and I think it's surprising for folks to begin to realize, literally and figuratively, the static involved, the noise that is obscuring our ability to communicate. And here is someone who comes along and he's got one practical thing, which is the elimination of that static, that noise. And at the same time, he's developing a theory of operation that is going to permit technologies that haven't even been imagined yet.
Yeah, he was really remarkable, and he was great. Like one of the clips I have in my documentary is him riding a unicycle and juggling. Like he's just like great. He's a great guy from what I've seen, anyway. Um, yeah. I think I think part of the I think part of the process is taking the basic idea of the mathematical stuff and saying that. You don't have to explain why it works or how it works. You just have to take it and say kind of what it does, and then say how that impacts other things. At least this is what I did. I take it, break it down. What does it do? Say how it chains into other things that are more important, and how it just keeps snowballing back and forth up to where we end up today. Like he wrote this paper, there was all these theories, the limit, we found the limit, we pushed the limit, we're getting closer and closer. We found basically the maximum that we can get, and it was really satisfying to see it come together like that. All the mathematical stuff and everything like that. It
Yeah,
was
well, it's a remarkable achievement that you could distill all of that complexity and make it for a layperson really understandable, and it's just a great story. I mean, all of the stories you've told are interesting and animated by complex personalities, whether it's Lumumba or whether it's Francis Kelsey, who's, standing as this bulwark against the momentum of industry to push this drug that's going to have devastating consequences for Americans and has had devastating consequences for Europeans and Britons and Canadians. And it's amazing the way you guys have harnessed the power of an individual, their personality and their contribution in a way that makes the story clearer. So congratulations to all. Now you are the three seniors. Let me move to the junior category, because I'm still just completely amazed at what you've been able to accomplish. And maybe David Gilbert, you could talk a little bit about your film on the ADA. What brought you to it, and tell me some of the organizational problems, because it has a kind of general arc that doesn't necessarily say you're going to be able to dive down deep and understand the significance of it. And yet you're able to, your character is really a popular movement. Your hero and heroines are those people with disabilities who have been shut out heretofore. Is that a correct way of interpreting how you finally mastered the narrative thing, or do you have other observations about that?
Yeah, I think you got it quite right. So I have severe dyslexia, and so does my brother, and my brother also has autism. So the ADA did have quite an impact on our life. So I thought I'd do it. I thought it matched the theme very well. Uh, it was a very complicated topic, especially I didn't realize how much about the government I had to learn about. A lot of crash course government videos. Uh, but it was hard covering the whole of the ADA. But when I tried to go into something uh, more specific, you can't really do it without talking about the whole thing. Uh, so it was a lot of it was hard to go through all the court documents and legislature because it's very wordy. But yeah, halfway through, I was a bit
Yeah.
thinking I was making the wrong decision, but eventually I grew to love it, and I'm glad I made that decision.
I think we're all glad that you made the decision. It's amazing, and it gave you something, and it's a tough topic to talk about. And I'd like you to talk about it for a second. I've crossed paths with this in two of my most recent films, on the American Buffalo, and then before that on the U.S. and the Holocaust. And that's this horrible pseudoscience of eugenics, which has played such a unbelievably pernicious role in our history, and yet we're not taught about it. It's not understood. We don't see the ways in which, too many Americans were in favor of this. Can you talk a little bit about bumping into, if it was the first time, or how you were able to integrate the story of eugenics into this larger issue of the American with Disabilities Act, and this very positive thing that happened?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I thought it was, people in wheelchairs couldn't get upstairs. But I realized the history was a lot darker when
Yes.
I dug further back. So there were millions of sterilizations to people with intellectual disabilities. If you had an intellectual disability, you couldn't be married. Ugly laws prevented people with unsightly disabilities from appearing in public. So as I dug deeper, that really amazed me.
It's so terrifically impressive, David, what you've done, and I think it commands a huge span of time, and yet it feels intimate and personal, which is, I find, incredibly difficult to try to do. Um, Maeve, talk about Sunny Days, right? Just tell me how you got into it. Why'd you pick this story? What were the tough aspects of trying to tell it?
Yeah, so I don't know. I wanted kind of more of like an uplifting topic this year. because last year the Radium Girls, it's such like a dark, sad story. But yeah, I really wanted to do Sesame Street. I was kind of torn between Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. But I grew up like loving to watch Sesame Street. And I thought that it would be great to fit the topic. The biggest challenge, at least for me, was in the beginning. Sesame Street is such like a wide topic.
Yes.
That in the beginning I was more just researching like the background and trying to figure out what I wanted to focus on. And so I had to really like narrow down, like looking at Sesame Street as like a general topic and pick like key points, like smaller, littler parts to focus on. And so I ended up with how the civil rights movement affected the show, and the study that Melissa Kearney and Philip Levine did that kind of proved that it could be an educational tool.
Right.
And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, so narrowing it down, I think, was my biggest challenge.
And it's so interesting. I knew Newt Minow. He passed away a year and a half ago, and I saw him the day before he passed away. And it was always Newt Minow is the person who coined the phrase about television that it was this vast wasteland, and it's his impetus that I think gets people to start thinking about things. Educational television, which becomes the National Educational Television Network, and then becomes PBS, and of course, the Children's Television Workshop comes out of it. And I thought you did a really good job of balancing the sort of the history of it, but with the personalities and who's going to be important, whether it's a Joan Cooney and or a Jim Henson or a Newt Minow and the people there. How did you come at that? What was the most difficult part of telling this story? It may be it is an uplifting and great story, but that doesn't mean that it's not as hard as talking about thalidomide in terms of making a film.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of hard to get everybody's perspectives from viewers, from the audience, from the people who were working as cast, to the people who were actually making the show. And I think that was really important to dive deeper to see everybody's individual perspectives, and people in the South, how they viewed the show, especially first when it came out, because there was such like controversy about if it should be shown or if it shouldn't, because of like the cast. And so I feel like highlighting everybody's opinions and views was really important to get all of the individual
I,
perspectives of the
I,
show.
I agree, and I did not know. I learned a lot of things in all of your films, but I did not know that Sesame Street also ran on non-educational networks. That it was just had that kind of reach early on before it consolidated into PBS.
Yeah, that was interesting to learn how it like started off just on like random, like lesser known television networks until it became such a bigger, like actual TV network, that we still have today and that people still watch, like the Educational Television Network.
Yeah, it's great. It's terrific, and it reminded me how much I liked it. I've got four daughters, and they grew up with it in the '80s and the '90s and the aughts and the teens. So I know it's long lasting. All right, David Miranda, you do not have the right to remain silent right now. You are obligated to talk to us and tell us first how you came to this project, why you chose it, and how you did as I think all of you are doing, and I'm trying to center this as a kind of unifying theme, sort of get the arc of the larger story, the aerial view, the top-down version, but also be able to make it intimate and bottom up. There are real people involved in this. Can you talk about why and then some of the struggles and the balance and calibration that we've been talking about, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really interested in law. I love watching like Law and Order, reading John Grisham books. I mean, I just love learning about it. So after seeing the theme for this year, I went over some landmark Supreme Court cases, and I'd like to say Miranda v. Arizona having the same last name as me made a impact in the thing. It really didn't. It was just a cool like plus having the same last name as me.
And so it's
But
completely, your connection is completely
yeah,
coincidental. We're not
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
some
But
distant relative.
I mean, after like looking at the theme, just the impact that Miranda had on millions of people for the better, the impact it had was, I just thought it really fit the theme really well and would also meet like law case. So yeah, that's why I picked it.
It's terrific, and I think what you balanced here so well, and what makes it so impressive an achievement, David, is that you've got the evidence of popular culture. You started off responding to my question with how much you like Law and Order and the other stuff, as I do and have spent my life, following those stories and like those the best. But I also thought that you made the people, the individuals involved in it, human and dynamic, and you also were able to understand that there's a constant undertow, that there is a not insignificant part of the population that thinks this has not leveled the playing field, but has imbalanced it against police and district attorneys. And I find that's how did you choose how much of that to show? Because it's very impressive how much it comes in, and you realize there's always some group that is interested in not extending those rights. That somehow this basic, at least to me, and it's clearly to you, essential fairness of the process, knowing your rights, could be still contested among some people.
Right. So I mean, I've read like whole law papers, like 50-page academic law papers, purely discrediting Miranda, giving facts, evidence, almost to the point of like bias where it'd be unreadable. And like, I there are so many people from immediately after the ruling to today who dislike the ruling and think it was wrong. So some of their concerns are true. Not all of them and not the majority, but there are definitely some concerns that are true. And I think the balance I really just came to is I had to realize that even though that they have a different opinion than me, because I think it was an amazing thing, it's important to include the
Yeah.
other side. Like in making a historical project, you can't just include one side. I talk about how good it is, but I also have to talk about how some people didn't like it and there are reasons why they didn't like it. So I just sort of came to a balance of putting my point out and making sure my point was noted while also including the other side to like not too much, but still enough to like you get what they're saying and you
Yeah,
like
no, and it's masterfully done. It reminded me of my still fury and anger. We made a film, my daughter, oldest daughter, Sarah Burns, and her husband, David McMahon, on the Central Park Five. These are five Black and Hispanic children who were had confessions coerced, and they spent 13, and the oldest was tried as an adult and spent 13 years in jail, and the others spent 7 years. It's one of those great tragedies, and a lot of it is the failure of the police to offer them rights or to have an attorney present. They did not understand the system they were getting into, and I thought was so interesting about following up the story of Miranda himself is just how complicated it was. And I think it's at the hallmark of a justice system is that we'd rather have a guilty person go free than have an innocent person go to jail.
yeah.
And it's a masterful job. All of you, I'm just so impressed. I wasn't planning to watch them twice, but I did. I just made the time and stayed up a little bit later the next day after I watched them to see them again. You're all to be congratulated. And now I understand that my punishment for congratulating you and having a conversation is for you to turn the tables and ask me questions. So who's going to start? Who's going to go first?
I mean, I can go first if
Okay, David, jump in. Yep.
so. I just one of my questions is for so many topics. There's thousands of like papers that are so many pages long. There's primary sources, and like 80% of that or more is going to be like unhelpful and is going
Right.
to be the basic like superficial part of the story. How do you like go about some of those sources that are really long, and how do you like look for what's really important and
Well,
weave that in?
that's as you know, and what all of you have had to do, this job, and I think most people think you make a film is you're building something, and you are, but you're also subtracting, right? It's mostly a job of subtraction. It's like even in architecture, you're building a house, but you're kicking away the false work and the scaffolding needed to do it. So a better analogy might be I'm talking to you from New Hampshire, where I've lived for 45 years, and we make maple syrup here, and it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. And so it's really the distillation of that. And we contact, as Harmony was talking about, scholars and people who know this stuff, and they can help direct you and distill the essence of the information. But I still think the healthier process, particularly in documentary, in particularly in historical documentary, where we're using a lot of archival material, particularly where we have vowed that we're not going to put our thumb on the scale and advocate for a particular point of view. We're just going to call balls and strikes, as I said, and do that. That it's hugely important to just have to wade through that material and understand how it's like a block of stone delivered to a sculptress's studio, and she's got to, chip away at it and figure out what is the story to tell. And I assume that all of you are nodding in recognition because you start off with a lot more stuff than you can possibly fit in, and then figure out, well, what's important to me, or what makes sense, or how do things tell? And some scenes that you really like have to go because they destabilize something else in favor of the larger, your obligations to the larger story. And I think that's always the case. That's our job, is to distill this. Maeve?
I was wondering, how like technological advancements, like since you started being like a documentarian and historian, how has that changed the way you do research and like the way you put together your document?
We're pretty obstinate up here. We continued to do it the same old way, but we've been influenced. When I first started, we were cutting, and for the first 20 years, we're just cutting the film, we're shooting it. If we want to fade out, we have to draw it in grease pencil. Nobody really knows what it looks like until the film is done. You don't know how somebody is ID'd. The graphics are, you just have to wait for it. You talk to your editor and you have to make a decision. The work that I'm going to give them might take them 2 days or 2 hours, and now that's changed to 2 hours and 2 minutes. But there's a tyranny in that. You want to make sure all the technological bells and whistles that we've been able to gain don't wag the dog. You don't want the tail wagging the dog. You want the dog to wag the tail. So we've insisted on kind of keeping an aspect of our research and our editing not back and stuck in some analog place, but stuck in some real place in which we're not taking shortcuts, and the technology is not driving us, we're driving the technology, we're using it. And so I've seen enormous change. My editing room down in town used to have 18 when we were making our film on jazz, before we switched to digital editing in 2001. 10 years after all of my colleagues had switched to there, and we were still shooting film and shot film for another 10 years because we liked the way it felt. We had 18 editing machines, Steenbecks, and maybe that's a foreign word to you. Everybody was editing on computer programs, and we were doing it by hand and cutting film and reconstituting. We had 17 or 18 interns. I mean, the house was just jammed with human beings. Now it's sort of quiet. Everybody's got a station and whatever. So there were things that gained, things that were lost, but on a whole, we've been wary of technology. We were talking a second ago about AI, and you realize that there's lots of promise and there's lots of dangers, and so we just have to be mindful of what those are. You know what I'm saying? That's really good. David Gilbert.
Yeah, so what do you wish you knew at the beginning of your career as a filmmaker? What techniques or tools did you wish you knew to organize a complicated topic, or do you wish you knew about the Ken Burns effect earlier?
It's funny that what you guys know as a Ken Burns effect is a really crude, version of what we've been trying to do, which is wake up an old photograph, right? By treating it the way a feature filmmaker would, a master shot with a long, a medium, a close, a tilt, a pan, a reveal, an insert of details of shots like that. And so I've basically all of my professional life been working with the same set of techniques, and style, if we could agree upon it, might be the authentic, the genuine, application of techniques so that you begin to see like a painter paints in a certain way and you say, oh, that looks very much like these Cezanne paintings from a distance all look the same. You get up close and each one is unique and difficult and doing its own thing. And so too with our films, we're using lots of elements that are visual, still photographs, motion pictures, live cinematography, talking heads, maps, graphics, things like that, and first person voice and third person narration and talking head again, and then music and sound effects. So within the realm, you've got 8 or 9 different things that you're playing with. And each film, I've made a film on Muhammad Ali that had no first person voices because we had people who were alive who could talk about them, right? We had newsreels that could speak. I'm now working on a film about the American Revolution. I've got a narrator again, but I also have dozens and dozens, hundreds of different individual voices read by 50 or 60 different actors who are, the best in the business. And that was the calibration that I needed to do. And I think it's just the thing is less what I wish I knew back then I want to make sure that I'm growing. That each film, not that I'm better than before, but that each film I'm taking into account the lessons that I've internalized from the first film. So that I think is the way I do it. I'd say it that way. It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I look at older films and I go, I never change them, but I go, oh, I wouldn't have faded out at that point. I would have cut right to the next scene or I wouldn't do that. But it's like looking at an old family album. You can see what you look like in first grade and maybe embarrassing or maybe not, or it has a fond memory. Whatever you do, you're not taking that picture out. You're accepting it. That's who I am. And because I've worked in public broadcasting, each of the films has been a director's cut. So I don't have anyone else to blame for limitations on the film except myself. And so I just accept and say, this is, I think, the best that I, and by extension, we, because this is a gloriously collaborative medium for me going forward. So I'd say that. Harmony.
My question is, what is the best question you have ever been asked, and what was your response to it?
See, I don't know. I know I have spent a lot of time being questioned, and I know I have said, wow, that was a really, really good question. It's always the ones that are tough that you can't remember. I think it doesn't really matter what you do, but whether you've decided to tend a garden or write a symphony or make a historical documentary film, we're sort of obligated to giving our attention to something. And I think that and I've just finished a film that'll be out next month on Leonardo da Vinci. And he's amazing. He's the most curious person on earth. And so I think the questions that resonate with me have to do with attention, our sustained attention. And you guys are all to be congratulated because as you've all acknowledged, there was periods in this process that were hard and difficult, and you didn't quit and you didn't give up and you moved through those obstacles. And that is the story of life, is overcoming that friction. So I think the things that I appreciate most, Harmony, are the questions that aren't specific to filmmaking or even to a specific film I've made on, but to the process of it and how we as human beings negotiate the complexity of what we do for a living, who we are as people, who the people are that we are closest to, and like my executive producer, Chester, who's asleep behind us. That's the most important thing I think there is. That in and of itself is a really, really good question. Elena.
Oh, I was just wondering, like, sorry, I'm like totally blanking right now. But like as we become a more like connected society and as information is like more easily shared, I would just say like what would be your advice about just like wading through like all
Yeah.
of this new misinformation, disinformation? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're asking a really important question, which is how do we operate in a post-truth world where too many people are susceptible to misinformation and conscious, deliberate disinformation that really clouds the thing. We're in the middle of an election cycle in which this is happening all the time, and people believe in fantastical and fanciful things that just aren't true. And when I was growing up, there were three networks, right? That was it. And PBS and maybe an independent station. And so you got your news from the same place. You read the local newspaper, or you read one of the great dailies, or you subscribed to the news service or the paper, your local paper subscribe. So we basically all agreed upon a set of facts. And you sort of work from there, and you'd have a different point of view, as David was pointing out about the Miranda question, but you were still operating from the same set of facts. And now people aren't. And we call this stuff social media, and it's not. There's nothing social about it, right? It's actually disconnected. If you've ever been in a room with your friends and you're all on your phones, you know what it means. I go to New York a lot for work, and I can walk down a city block and notice that absolutely everyone is on their phone in some way, shape, or form. And it seems so disconnect. They were so disconnected from, and I'm doing it too, disconnected from their environment. And it used to be if somebody was talking out loud by themselves, that there was something you were concerned for them. Now everybody's talking out loud because they're having a conversation not in the moment. And so I think we have to be we have to decide for ourselves a fundamental decision. Where do I want to go? Do I want to be the teller of truth, as complicated and as difficult as they are? And as David is suggesting, and Wynton Marsalis said this to me in our jazz thing, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. Can you tell a complicated story that can own both sides of it? Or does it have to just be a dialectic, a binary thing? There's nothing binary out there. It's only the one and the zero that Jack helped promote has got us in this idea that it's just an on-off switch, and it's not. And to be able to represent complexity and undertow and complication is a great virtue of what all of you have done. And I think that's the saving grace of all of what you're doing. And I've blown a little bit of what I wanted to say at the end, because I think you've asked a really central question about that. Jack.
Yeah, so some of your soundtracks are some of the most famous in documentaries ever. So like, how do you find the right soundtrack? How do you find it? Where do you go? Where do you look? How do you know when a soundtrack fits? How do you
And
know
I
when
assume you're speaking principally about music,
Yeah,
right?
music,
Yeah.
soundtracks, sound effects,
So
anything along those lines.
that's a really good question. I think traditionally the way it's worked is people work while they're editing with sort of temp tracks, right? And then you call in your composer when the thing is done, and then you kind of you have that person make a score, which is a mathematical term, which is to the frame. So if some action is happening, you want some beat to happen there. We've thrown that out, and from the very beginning, we would go and assemble as many tunes from the period that we liked, and then have them played as many different ways as we could, and then start working them in very early on. And we would find ourselves changing a line of narration, shortening it or lengthening it to meet a phrase of film, a phrase of the music. I mean, you all know what it's like in a horror film when you turn down the volume. It's not as scary anymore. And so our idea is that, do you want to have icing on a cake? That's something that's added afterwards, something that you hope will breathe some life into it? Or do you already have life because the music is organic to the process and it's more like fudge? It's all the way throughout. And I prefer the latter. I want the fudge. I want the music not to be scored to the frame, but to find out the way in which music, which is the only art form that's invisible, Wynton Marsalis points that out, and it's, to me, the fastest art form. I think it's what every other art form aspires to, is to, when it dies and goes to heaven, it wants to be music. And in fact, and I don't know about you guys, but in the editing room, all we use are musical analogies. Hold that another beat. Hold that two beats. Can you get to the end of the phrase before you do this? And we're not necessarily talking about the music itself. We're talking about the cutting and the pacing. And we're talking about pacing and rhythm and beat. And so all of it all of it is a kind of music behind it. Even the voices, how they speak and the intonation, how we use sound effects, how we carve things out. And so to me, music is so important. In fact, this new film on Leonardo da Vinci has a score. We actually brought in a composer who helped sort of lift up. This is the most curious person on earth, and so his curiosity needs to be supported. And the composer, a woman named Caroline Shaw, very young but incredibly advanced in her sophistication, and uses not just instrumental and percussive groups but vocal groups. And you can see the how she responded to his genius and his curiosity with her own, and help lift up the film with the soundtrack. And that's all you want to do, is just give a place, a bed for the story you're telling to lie, and to give it emotional resonance. And I don't mean sentimental or nostalgic. I mean, I found myself so moved by Harmony's story of Francis, and I felt it. I felt it. And that's what we want to do. I describe myself, as I first started off, as an emotional archaeologist, right? I'm not interested in sentimentality or nostalgia. That's the enemy of good anything. But higher emotions are what we're looking for. So, we're almost out of time. And I just wanted to say, how many of you, show of hands, how many of you are going to continue working in filmmaking? Okay, so that's more than half. And how many of you would like to be a filmmaker at the end of that want to be a filmmaker, or that this is sort of just a means of exploration of other subjects that you're getting into? Has anybody decided on filmmaking as a profession, or something you might think of continuing? Anybody, just speak up if you can. David Gilbert.
Maybe I haven't decided yet.
Uh-huh. It's
Got a
great.
little bit more time.
Uh-huh. And you described yourself as having dyslexia. And I assume that there are advantages in a filmic medium. You're still obviously dealing with words and printed words and having a script and doing that, but I also imagine that it's a form that permits you to communicate.
Yeah, and even if you look closely at some of my documentaries, uh some of the words I have, maybe some of the titles are misspelled.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I think I just lost power. That's fine.
You're
Uh
still with us. That's all that matters.
yeah.
Okay, so does anybody feel like this process of making this films, and it sounds like most of you have made films before this too, um, what did it teach you? You don't have to be a filmmaker. You don't have to do that. But I do know that the process of submitting to the rigorous process of making a film is really incredible. Anybody, just if you want to say, Elena.
Yeah, I think like over the two films that I made, it definitely taught me so much about like writing, and like how to craft like a almost like a pretty script, like how to make it sound nice. And then also this last year with like a bigger topic, definitely how to like synthesize an argument and how to like refine it down to like basically like as short as it can be while still like presenting all of the facts that I want. And then also just like beyond that, some just like definitely perseverance things. And like
Yes.
it was so much work, but I'm so glad that I did it.
Yeah, well, that's it. I'll start the sign off from all of this. Unless did anybody else want to comment on this and what it's given you? You don't have to be a filmmaker. Yes, Harmony.
It taught me how to reflect a lot. I think with this documentary that I made, I realized that when something so tragic happens, it's not just because of one mistake. It's a series of mistakes that puts you in that vulnerable position. And
Yes.
I guess I just never really realized because whenever something went wrong for me, I would always just think, oh, it's because of this one thing. But it just taught me to be more thoughtful about everything that I do in general.
Oh my goodness, what a great lesson. I know that when we're in school, high school, particularly senior high school, college, that we're taught sort of methods of writing, organization, particularly of term papers, and essays, and they always are templates that you can use and apply, and obviously stray from them when the subject demands it. I find also working in documentary films, I certainly find it in the young people I meet with National History Day and more intimately with this Next Generation Angel Awards, that regardless of where you go, that kind of open-mindedness, the ability to have to synthesize a great deal of data into a small amount of time, an impossibly, for me, small amount of time, and to be able to represent different viewpoints and understand, I think, as you said, a really important part. There's never just one thing. It's often a whole series of things, a combination, a cascading series of events, and then you realize it could have been entirely different. Somebody once told me that good history is thinking that it might not turn out the way you know it did. Uh, it sounds sort of convoluted, but it means that you would go, and I've been told by many people from our Civil War film that they went into Ford's Theater hoping this time the gun wouldn't fire and Abraham Lincoln wouldn't be assassinated. And they were just, it was counterintuitive, but that's what they wanted. To me, that was music to my ears. That's the highest compliment you could get, is that there was this little modicum in them that they thought it might turn out the way they know that it did. So you guys are so great. Documentaries have for the last 30 or 40 years had an extraordinary explosion of popularity, but a lot of that has been diminished by what I'll call reality television, which is not. No one eats bugs in front of millions of people. No one proposes to the person that they love in front of millions of people. These are intimate human things. And so what happens is too much of reality-based television is essentially a kind of voyeuristic distraction for people who spend way too much time on their couches, and that what we've all asked ourselves to do is incredibly complex. And I think that for a lot of people, particularly with the new technologies that we're talking about, that makes us ahistorical. It makes us disinterested. We think that that we can live comfortably in an all-consuming present and are not aware of what's going on in the past. But of course, where we've been has brought us to this moment and will take us to our future. And no amount of buying the right brand of cars or wearing the right jeans or perfume is going to save you from the inevitable vicissitudes of life, which will visit us all. And so I think you are all to be saluted and commended for your perseverance. You brought that up. This is what I wanted to say. There are only two truths that I know. You have to know yourself and know that you have something to say. And it's perfectly fine to say, I don't. And then you have to just have that will to overcome the inevitable friction of each project, the perseverance that's required. And you've all done that here, and you've done it magnificently. I'm really proud of you, and I'm so glad to know you and call each other fellow filmmakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I have to say it has been an honor to get to listen to this conversation between 8 great American history documentarians. So thanks so much to each of you all. As I was listening to this, I was thinking too, that what each of you does is such an important form of patriotism. We talk a lot about patriotism in lots of different ways, particularly in an election year, but taking the time to so thoughtfully and thoroughly and creatively look at our history, excavate stories that have been overlooked and obscured, and then tell them in such balanced and compelling ways. That's a form of dedication to your country. And that's what patriotism is. So I want to thank all 8 of you for being great patriots too, and for contributing to your country in this way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We will stay in touch with you, and we can't wait to continue working with you. And as always, Ken, thank you so much.
My pleasure. This was great. I think you summed it up really well. These are times in which the truth really, really matters, and you guys have adhered to it in such a spectacular way. I'm glad to know you all. Thank you for your thoughtfulness, and most of all, thank you for your films.
Thank you for the time and everything. Mr. Burns, thank you.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
Ken. I'm Ken. So it's great to be with you. To be continued, right? Good luck, everyone.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Bye.